There is a girl locked inside a lantern. She has been there since before she could form memories of anything else. The glass walls are the only world she knows. The dim orange glow from her own body is the only light she has ever seen. And outside that lantern, beyond the thick pane of smudged glass, the Fire Kingdom burns and roils and carries on without her, as if she does not exist, as if she was never born at all. Her name is Phoebe, though nobody calls her that yet. Nobody really calls her anything yet. She is just the princess, the dangerous one, the unstable one, the one Flame King keeps locked away because she burned too bright the moment she entered this world, and burning too bright in the Fire Kingdom is apparently the one thing you are not supposed to do. Which, if you think about that for more than a moment, is one of the strangest and most quietly devastating ironies in all of Adventure Time. Here is a kingdom made of fire, a kingdom where every citizen flickers and blazes and carries the heat of the earth inside their chest, a kingdom that calls itself powerful, volatile, dangerous, proud. And at the very center of that kingdom, in the deepest chamber of the Fire Palace, sits a glass lantern containing the most brilliant flame of all, locked away because she burned too intensely, even for them. Think about what that means. Think about the kind of loneliness that produces. To be too much of the very thing you are supposed to be. To embody your own nature more fully than everyone around you, and to be punished for it. Locked inside glass, watched, contained. Not because you did something wrong, not because you made a choice that hurt someone, but because of what you are, fundamentally, from the moment of your first breath. That is where Flame Princess begins. That is the first philosophical question she asks. Just by existing, what does it mean to be born as something the world is afraid of? Section 1. The Girl in the Lantern. Let's settle in. Get comfortable. Whatever you're resting on right now, let it hold you a little more. Take a slow breath. Because this story, the real story of Phoebe, the fire elemental who would become one of the most genuinely interesting characters in Adventure Time, starts not with fire and battle and power. It starts with stillness. It starts with glass walls and the muffled sound of a kingdom moving around you while you remain, suspended and trapped, at its center. Flame Princess was born with a distinction that nobody asked her about and nobody prepared her for. She was the most powerful fire elemental in the kingdom. This was observable from practically the moment of her birth. Infants do not typically reduce entire forest clearings to ash while giggling, but she did. A sympathetic servant, refusing to carry out the Flame King's original order to have her left in the woods to die, instead left her with a rock woodsman, a kind and simple creature who had no idea what to do with a baby made of flame. She wandered away from him, laughing, burning, purely herself in the way that only very small children can be before the world teaches them to shrink. She eventually drifted near the borders of the Candy Kingdom, and that is where Princess Bubblegum, still a young ruler herself, first encountered her. Dressed in a fire suit and carrying instruments, Bubblegum assessed the infant with the same cool, analytical detachment she applies to everything. The data was clear. The baby was too powerful. She was physically unstable. Her elemental matrix was volatile in a way that could, under the right conditions, bore a hole straight through the planet's crust and into its core. Not hypothetically, actually. So Bubblegum did what Bubblegum does. She calculated, she decided, and she acted. She brought the infant back to the Flame King and told him, clearly and without sentiment, to contain his daughter. Keep her locked away. The specific reason she gave was elaborate and scientific, something involving romantic passion, destabilizing the elemental matrix to a point of catastrophic failure. But the actual result of that instruction was simple. A glass lantern, a child inside it, 14 years of growing up in a room the size of a trophy case. There are things that Adventure Time never spells out for you, but that the show quietly embeds in every scene like a temperature underneath the air. One of those things is the particular texture of what it is to grow up completely alone, without adequate stimulation, without the freedom to move or touch or explore, without anyone who fully sees you or speaks to you as a person rather than a problem. You develop in strange ways, Maya, when that happens. Your understanding of the world is built from fragments and inference. Your emotional landscape forms without the usual guardrails of social feedback. You have feelings that are enormous and raw because you have never had to learn to modulate them around other people. You do not know your own strength in any dimension, physical or emotional, because you have never had the chance to test it safely. That is Flame Princess at 14, at the beginning of Incendium. When Jake arrives in the Fire Kingdom pretending to be Finn, and the Flame King, who has only just decided that having a dangerous daughter locked in a lantern is worth something, if that daughter can be used as a political tool, lets her out for the first time in her life. Because he thinks this boy might be ruthless enough to handle her. Because in the Fire Kingdom, power is only valuable if it can be aimed at someone. She steps out of that lantern, and everything is completely new. Now here is something I want you to really sit with, because it matters for everything that comes after. Flame Princess has been watching the world through glass for 14 years. She has seen people moving around her, heard voices, maybe caught scraps of conversations, observed the flickering politics of the Fire Palace from her limited vantage point. She has had presumably very limited interaction. Flambeau mentions knowing her through the lantern, which implies they talked through the glass. That is it. One friend, filtered through a barrier, for her entire childhood and adolescence. So when she steps out, she does not step out with bitterness as her primary mode. She steps out with curiosity, and with immediate, sincere, almost overwhelming openness to connection. The girl Jake encounters, pretending to be Finn, singing songs, making grand gestures, is not calculating. She is not performing. She responds to affection with the kind of all-in immediacy that only comes from someone who has been starving for it. She is delighted. She blushes. She is completely, utterly present in this moment, because this moment is the most real thing that has ever happened to her. And then he rejects her. Fake Finn, Jake in disguise, tells her he does not like her anymore. And the response is immediate. Catastrophic. She does not retreat. She does not cry quietly. She erupts. Not because she is evil, not because she is broken, but because rejection, for someone who has never experienced the full range of human connection, who has been waiting her whole compressed little life for someone to see her as worth knowing, lands like an absolute detonation. The fire she throws is not malice. It is pain taking the only form available to it. This is the first genuinely philosophical moment in Flame Princess's arc, and it happens in her very first episode. The question it raises is not really about her. It is about what we decide to call people who have been hurt in ways we do not understand. Flame King calls her evil. The word just slides off his tongue. Evil. As if the correct label for a child who burns the world when she is in agony is evil, rather than, say, wounded. As if the correct response to that burning is another cage, rather than understanding. Adventure Time has always been extremely good at presenting villains and antagonists and dangerous forces in ways that gradually complicate your initial read of them. Flame King himself is a villain of sorts, manipulative, self-serving, deeply invested in a philosophy that says power is the only real value and everything else is weakness. He is not an idiot. He genuinely believes that the Fire Kingdom functions the way it does for good reason. He genuinely believes his daughter is evil because, in his framework, everything that disrupts order is evil, and she disrupts order absolutely. But the show never lets you stay comfortable with his assessment. It keeps showing you Phoebe from the inside, keeps letting you see what her fire actually costs her, keeps asking you to notice the gap between what she is called and what she actually is. A girl, confused, curious, staggeringly powerful, raised in a lantern, stepping out into a world that was already talking about her before she learned to talk back. That is who she is at the beginning. That is the raw material from which everything else is shaped. And when you understand that foundation, the years of containment, the enormous latent power that had no outlet and no guidance, the genuine innocence beneath the destructive capability, then everything she does from that point forward makes complete sense. Not as evil, as human, or as close to human as a fire elemental can be. She chases Jake back to the tree fort because she is angry and she does not yet have any other way to process anger. She sets things on fire because that is what she does when feelings overwhelm the available space inside her. And then she meets the actual Finn, and something shifts. He catches her when she falls. He brings her inside, he tells her he likes her. And the look on her face, that softening, that honest surprise, those eyes going wide with something that is almost disbelief, tells you everything you need to know about what 14 years in a lantern does to a person's expectations of other people. She was not expecting kindness. She had no template for it. She had theory, maybe, fragments of observation through glass, but not experience. Not real, physical, aimed at her kindness. And when it comes, it rewrites everything. The fire dims a little. The anger recedes. She does not know what to do with this feeling, this warmth that is not her own heat, but something coming from outside her, from another person who is not afraid. That moment, that soft and quiet moment in the dark at the tree fort while smoke still drifts from the burning pictures of Princess Bubblegum on the floor, that is where Flame Princess's real story begins. Not with the lantern, with the hand that reaches out to catch her when she falls. If you are watching from somewhere cozy right now, if you are listening to this while you drift towards sleep or rest your eyes after a long day, drop a comment down below and tell me where you are and what time it is. I genuinely love knowing where people are when they find these videos. And if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It means the world, and it helps more than you know. Section 2. Fire and what it means to be alive. There is something worth understanding about fire before we go any further. Not just fire as power or fire as danger, though both of those things matter, but fire as a way of being alive. Fire as a philosophical condition. Most of the living things in the land of Oo are solid. They have mass, persistence, edges. Finn is made of bone and muscle and skin. Jake is made of magic dog stuff that can stretch and change but always returns to a stable form. Princess Bubblegum is candy and bioorganic compounds and, as we learn progressively across the series, something much stranger underneath. But they all share the quality of being, in some fundamental sense, things that persist without effort. They exist by default. They do not have to keep doing something in order to remain themselves. Fire is different. Fire is not a thing. Fire is a process. A chemist will tell you that fire is a rapid oxidation reaction, a chain of molecular events occurring so quickly and continuously that they produce heat and light as byproducts. Fire has no mass of its own. Fire is entirely defined by the relationship between fuel, oxygen, and heat. Take away any one of those three elements and fire ceases immediately, completely, without remainder. Fire does not rest. Fire does not pause. Fire is only ever burning, or it is nothing at all. Now think about what it means to be alive in that way, to be a being whose very existence is a continuous active event, to be someone who cannot simply be without also always doing, who cannot settle into stillness without that stillness threatening to become extinction, who must always burn, always consume, always interact with the world around them just to remain present in it. Flame Princess is not simply a girl who can produce fire. She is constituted by fire. She is the process, not the product. Her identity is not something she carries around inside her. It is something she is constantly generating, moment to moment, through her interaction with the world. When she stops burning, she does not rest. She diminishes. This is profound when you start pulling at it. Because what the show is describing, through Flame Princess's elemental nature, is a particular philosophy of identity and existence. It is the position that some beings are not nouns, but verbs. That some kinds of selfhood are inherently dynamic, always in motion, always in the act of becoming rather than simply being. That the attempt to contain such beings, to make them static, to freeze them into a defined and non-threatening shape, is not protection. It is slow destruction. The lantern was not just a prison. The lantern was a philosophical assault. It was the physical imposition of the belief that Phoebe's nature, her active, consuming, perpetually generating nature, needed to be stopped. That her fire was the problem rather than the source. That the correct version of Flame Princess was a Flame Princess who burned less brightly, who consumed less, who interacted with the world less intensely. A controlled Flame Princess, a quiet Flame Princess. A Flame Princess who had learned to be a noun, But you cannot teach a fire to be a noun. You can only contain it until it is starved, or release it until it finds its own right level. What we watch across the entire arc of Flame Princess's character is the long process of finding that right level. Not the suppression of fire, not the elimination of the burning, but the channeling of it, the directed use of it. The discovery that fire, in the right hands and with the right understanding, is not just destruction. Fire is also warmth. Fire is also light. Fire is also the clearing of deadwood that allows new things to grow. Fire is the forge that transforms raw ore into something both beautiful and useful. Fire is the sacred thing that humans gathered around in the oldest nights of their history because fire meant safety, meant community, meant the ability to see each other's faces in the dark. Flame Princess is all of that. She is always all of that, even when she is only being shown as the dangerous part. The warmth and the light are always there. They are just buried under years of being told that she is only the danger. One of the quieter things the show does, and it does it so gently that you might miss it if you are not listening for it, is consistently distinguish between the fire that destroys and the fire that creates. In her very first real appearance after the Treefort encounter, in the Season 4 premiere Hot to the Touch, we see Flame Princess discovering the world for the first time. She moves through it with enormous and poorly controlled energy, yes. She burns things, yes, but she is also completely, genuinely delighted by everything. She examines flowers with wonder. She pokes at things curiously. She is not trying to destroy, she is trying to know. She is engaging with the world the way any person would who had been prevented from engaging with it for 14 years, with total, overwhelming, uncalibrated enthusiasm. The tragedy is not that she is destructive. The tragedy is that she has never had the chance to learn the difference between engaging and consuming, because nobody ever gave her enough space and time and safety to practice. In The Lantern, the only way to interact with the world was to press against the glass, and the glass never changed and never broke and never responded. Outside the lantern, the world changes when she presses against it. Sometimes it changes by burning. She is learning this in real time, at 14, in front of an audience that has already made up its mind about what she is. There is a particular cruelty in being judged for instincts you developed in an environment specifically designed to produce exactly those instincts. The things that made Flame Princess dangerous when she first emerged from the lantern were not character flaws. They were adaptive responses to the conditions of her imprisonment. She had enormous emotional intensity because she had no social environment in which to diffuse it. She had no emotional regulation because no one had ever modeled it for her or given her reason to practice it. She had destructive reactions to rejection because rejection, for someone in her situation, was genuinely catastrophic. Not metaphorically, but actually, in terms of what it meant for her survival and sense of self. None of these things are evil. They are comprehensible. They are the direct outputs of the input she received. And the show, to its considerable credit, never lets you forget that. It keeps the sympathy active. It keeps showing you the gap between what Flame King says she is and what she actually demonstrates herself to be in moment after moment of genuine warmth, genuine curiosity, genuine effort. She wants to understand how things work. She wants to know why water and fire are opposites. She wants to know why she cannot be near the things she wants to be near without burning them. She does not frame this as frustration at the universe. Not yet, not at this stage. She frames it as a problem she wants to solve. There is something in that orientation, that problem-solving curiosity, that tells you exactly what Flame Princess could have been if anyone had ever given her the resources to be it. In the episode Hot to the Touch, after she has burned part of the forest and Finn has been trying to stop her, there is a moment where Finn cries. Just a single tear. And Flame Princess stops. She stares at the tear, fascinated and a little alarmed. In her understanding, Finn is a water elemental. His tears are part of his nature as water, just as her fire is part of her nature as fire. She believes in that moment that they are natural opposites, that the universe has designed them to be incompatible, that even wanting to be near each other is somehow cosmically prohibited. This is a 14-year-old girl, brilliant, powerful, raised in total isolation, making the best philosophical sense she can of a world that keeps reacting to her in ways that hurt. She is not wrong to search for patterns. She is not wrong to try to build a framework. She is just working with incomplete information in an incomplete emotional environment, doing the best she can with what she has. Which is, in the end, all any of us are ever really doing. What makes Flame Princess extraordinary is not her fire. Lots of things in Ooh produce fire. What makes her extraordinary is the quality of attention she brings to her own existence. Even at 14, even freshly emerged from a lantern and barely able to navigate a social interaction without something catching a light, she is genuinely trying to understand herself. She is not just reacting, she is observing her reactions and asking what they mean. She is not just burning, she is asking why she burns and whether the burning is something she has to be or something she can eventually choose. That question, whether the burning is fate or choice, is the engine that drives everything that follows. And the answer Adventure Time arrives at, slowly and painfully and beautifully over the course of multiple seasons, is complicated and earned. It is not that she stops burning, it is not that she becomes someone who no longer runs hot. It is that she discovers, through enormous effort and real heartbreak, and the kind of growth that only happens when things break first, that fire in the hands of someone who understands it is the most powerful, constructive force in the world. She was always that. She just needed time to learn it. Section 3. The nature versus nurture question. At some point in the series, it surfaces most explicitly in the Season 4 episode Ignition Point. Flame Princess discovers that her father has been whispering the word evil into her ear while she sleeps. Not metaphorically, literally. He stands at the entrance to her room and murmurs the word evil, evil, evil into the darkness while she sleeps, attempting to program her subconscious toward the identity he has always wanted her to inhabit. He is trying to make her what he has already decided she is. He is trying to construct her nature from the outside. When she wakes up and finds him doing this, the look on her face is one of the most quietly devastating things in Adventure Time. It is not just shock. It is the specific kind of hurt that comes from having your worst fears about yourself confirmed by the person who should have protected you from those fears. It is the hurt of being seen, not as a person, but as a project, as raw material to be shaped towards someone else's purpose. The nature versus nurture debate is one of the oldest arguments in philosophy, and it is also one of the most personally urgent. Because it is not an abstract question. It is the question of whether you are what you are because of something inevitable in your constitution, or whether you are what you are because of what was done to you and around you and to your understanding of yourself from the very beginning of your life. It is the question of whether you have always been this, or whether you became this, and whether the difference matters. Flame King's position is unambiguous. He believes in nature. Specifically, he believes that the citizens of the Fire Kingdom have a nature, one that is competitive, power-seeking, fundamentally amoral in a way that he calls evil, not as a condemnation, but as a simple description. Fire people are like fire. They consume. They compete. They dominate or they are dominated. Flame Princess was born a fire person. Therefore, she is evil. Therefore, any appearance of goodness or kindness or gentleness in her is either an illusion, a strategic pose, or evidence of weakness that needs to be corrected. This is not a marginal or idiosyncratic position within the Fire Kingdom's culture. It is the dominant framework. The Fire Kingdom operates according to a hierarchy of strength. The strong rule the weak. The ruthless survive. Mercy is tactical at best, suicidal at worst. Flame King is not unusual in believing this. He is the most successful product of the system he governs. But here is what makes Flame King's position philosophically interesting, rather than just monstrous. He is not entirely wrong about the facts. Fire people do have a nature. They are constitutionally drawn toward intensity, passion, dominance. These tendencies are real. They have physical correlates. The emotional instability, the literal heat generated by passion, the escalating power output when feelings run high. He is not inventing these things. He is describing actual characteristics of fire elemental biology. Where he goes catastrophically wrong is in the inference from those characteristics to those conclusions. From fire nature to evil nature. From intense to irredeemable. From powerful to necessarily destructive. The show makes this argument against against Flame King's position not through lectures or debates, but through Phoebe herself, through what she does and who she chooses to be over and over again, in situations where she has every reason and every opportunity to choose otherwise. She is given multiple chances to be what her father says she is. Multiple moments where violence would be easy, where cruelty would be justified by anyone's reckoning, where power would naturally flow toward dominance. And she keeps choosing differently. Not perfectly, not without making mistakes, but with a consistent orientation towards something other than what she was told she was. Consider what we know about Flame Princess's early childhood, the parts we see in flashback or pieced together from accounts. She wandered away from the Rock Woodsman laughing, burning the forest around her, yes, but laughing. Not menacingly, not because she wanted to destroy, because she was a baby and she was happy and everything was new. That is not evil. That is one of the most recognizably innocent things in the world. The destructiveness was real. The intent was not. She was not hurting things because she wanted to hurt things. She was engaging with the world as fully as her nature allowed, and her nature happened to be fire. The distinction between intent and effect is one of the most important moral distinctions that exists, and it is one that Flame King deliberately collapses because collapsing, it serves his purposes. If he can make her believe that the effect she produces, the burning, the destruction, is the same as her moral character, then he can make her believe she is evil. And if she believes she is evil, she will either become what he needs her to be, or she will destroy herself in the attempt not to be it. It is a sophisticated trap. The worst traps always are. What the show asks, through Flame Princess's whole arc, is whether someone can escape a trap like that once they are inside it. Whether the person someone has been told they are from birth can be refused and replaced with someone truer and better. Whether self-determination can win out over decades of deliberate conditioning. The answer is yes. But the yes is not free, and it is not easy, and it does not come all at once. It comes in pieces, in small refusals, in the accumulation of 100 moments where she could have been what Flame King said she was and chose instead to be something else. When Finn asks her, in Hot to the Touch, not to hurt innocent people, she stops. Not because she is afraid of him. She could incinerate him without effort. She stops because she considers what he said, because she has the capacity for that consideration, and because the request resonates with something inside her that has always been there beneath the conditioning, a native gentleness that the lantern compressed but could not eliminate. When she visits with Finn's friends and family, she is awkward and intense and occasionally sets things on fire by accident, but she is also genuinely trying. She is practicing being a person in the world, developing the emotional muscles that were never exercised in the lantern, building the social awareness that no one ever taught her. The fact that she is doing this at all, that she finds the effort worthwhile, that she wants to belong to something larger than the Fire Kingdom's zero-sum power games, that is not the behavior of someone whose nature is evil. That is the behavior of someone whose nature is being actively reclaimed from the story someone else told about it. The subliminal messaging episode is not just disturbing because of what Flame King is doing. It is disturbing because of when she catches him. She catches him because she wakes up, because some part of her is alert even in sleep to intrusion, because some part of her has always been resisting the programming, even before she knew what the programming was. The fact that Flame King has to keep repeating the word evil, has to do it over and over, has to do it in secret while she sleeps, because doing it openly does not work, is its own kind of evidence that it is not working. You do not need to condition someone who is already what you say they are. You only need to condition someone who keeps refusing to be it. Flame Princess refuses. Continuously, imperfectly, stubbornly, often without knowing, that is what she is doing. She refuses the label of evil the way you refuse an ill-fitting piece of clothing that keeps being pushed at you. Not dramatically, not always consciously, but with a consistent and deep resistance that eventually becomes refusal and then becomes something much more powerful than refusal. Eventually becomes clarity about who she is, about who she always was, about the difference between a nature that expresses itself through fire and a nature that is fire's most destructive impulse. She is the former. She always was. The question of nature versus nurture in her case resolves to something like this. Her nature is fire, yes, passionate, intense, sometimes consuming. But her nurture, the 14 years in the lantern, the whispering of evil in the dark, try to define that fire nature as a moral failing rather than an elemental fact. And she eventually, through enough contact with the world outside the lantern, finds that the fire nature and the moral goodness are not in conflict. That you can be a fire elemental and be kind. That burning and caring are not opposites. That the right understanding of what she is makes her more, not less, capable of choosing to be good. That realization is not given to her. She earns it. Over seasons of trying and failing and trying again, over heartbreak and betrayal and the slow accumulation of chosen goodness. And when it finally crystallizes, it is unshakable, because it was not handed to her by anyone else's authority. It came from inside, from her own experience, from evidence she gathered with her own hands and her own fire. That is what makes it real. That is what the lantern and the whispered evil could never produce, and what Flame Princess eventually produces for herself. A self built from the inside out that belongs entirely to her. Section 4. Hot to the touch. Learning the world hurts. There is something almost unbearably poignant about watching someone experience the world for the first time, when that first time comes at 14 rather than at 2 or 3 or 4, when it should have come. The developmental windows for learning certain things without cost are smaller than we like to think. They are not closed after 14 Abadma. The human brain, and presumably the fire elemental brain, is flexible for much longer than that. But learning at 14 what should have been learned at 4 comes with an added layer. You are learning the content, yes, but you are also learning at the same time that you should already know this, that the absence of this knowledge is itself a kind of damage, that there is a gap between yourself and others that is not your fault, but is still real and must still be navigated. Hot to the Touch is the episode where this becomes impossible to ignore. The Season 4 premiere picks up directly from where Incendium left off. Flame Princess is outside the tree fort. She is angry. She has been lied to, rejected, confused, and she is processing all of that in the only register she currently has available to her. But Finn is there. Finn, who actually likes her. Finn, who is now actively trying to make things right, trying to explain, trying to reach through the fire to the person inside it. And she is simultaneously drawn toward him and burning everything around her. Not out of malice, but out of the simple fact that she has never been in a situation even remotely like this before. She has no map for it. She is building the map in real time while also setting the map on fire, which is not an ideal workflow. One of the things the episode does brilliantly is show you Flame Princess in discovery mode. She does not just blast through the world, she examines it. She pokes at flowers and watches what happens when her heat reaches them. She moves through spaces curiously, her fire trailing behind her, learning through direct contact what her presence does to things. This is not evil behavior. This is profoundly, recognizably childlike behavior, the behavior of someone learning about cause and effect through direct experiment, regardless of the cost. The cost here, of course, is fire damage. Significant, indiscriminate fire damage. The Goblin Kingdom suffers for Flame Princess's curiosity. This is the moral complication the show refuses to pretend away. Her learning is real, and her curiosity is genuine, and her intent is not destructive. And the goblins' houses still burn. People still get hurt. The good intent does not erase the real harm. But the real harm does not make the good intent irrelevant. Adventure Time holds these two things together with enormous care. It does not let you dismiss Flame Princess's harmlessness of intent as an excuse for the damage she causes. But it also does not let you reduce the damage she causes to a verdict on her character. It keeps insisting that both things are true simultaneously, and that dealing honestly with both things requires more nuance than either simple forgiveness or simple condemnation. This is one of the things the show does that sets it apart from a lot of children's animation, and from a lot of adult animation too, honestly. It is deeply uninterested in the moral clarity that makes stories feel safer and more satisfying, but less true. It would be safer to say Flame Princess is dangerous, so she must be stopped. It would be safer to say Flame Princess means well, so everything is fine. But the show keeps refusing the safety. It keeps insisting on the harder, messier, more accurate position, which is that a being can mean well and cause harm, can have a nature that is simultaneously wonderful and dangerous, can be worth protecting and worth being careful around, and that all of these things coexist without canceling each other out. There is a moment in Hot to the Touch that matters philosophically more than it might seem to on first watch. Finn builds something. He constructs a special suit for himself, covered in tinfoil, so that he can be near Flame Princess without being burned. He lines the fort. He prepares for contact with her by preparing for the heat she produces. He does not ask her to be less hot. He does not wait for her to become safe before approaching her. He makes himself able to handle the heat. That gesture is quiet and it is enormous. It is Finn saying, with engineering rather than words, that she is worth the effort of adaptation. That the correct response to someone who runs too hot is not to demand that they cool down, but to find a way to be near them anyway. To take on some of the cost of that proximity yourself, rather than making the entire cost theirs. This is radical when you put it next to where Flame Princess came from. Flame King's response to her was to make her pay entirely for the difficulty of her nature. Imprisonment, suppression, the demand that she be less. Finn's response is to adjust himself, to build a bridge between his nature and hers. Not a permanent solution. The tinfoil suit is a band-aid, not a cure, and they will run into the limits of that approach dramatically later in Burning Low. But as a philosophy, as a statement about how you approach someone whose way of being in the world is different from yours, it is genuinely beautiful. You do not ask fire to be water, you find a way to live alongside the fire. The episode also gives us one of the first glimpses of something very important: Flame Princess's genuine capacity for guilt. When she understands that she has hurt people, that the things burning in the Goblin Kingdom are homes and lives, and not just abstract matter, she does not shrug it off. She does not use her father's framework to dismiss it as simply the nature of things. She processes it. The processing is not smooth. It never will be smooth because she does not yet have the tools for it, but it is real. There is genuine moral distress in her when she realizes the full cost of her behavior. That capacity for guilt is crucial. It is not separate from her fire nature. It is not the good part of her suppressing the bad part. It is evidence that her fire nature and her moral self are more integrated than anyone has given them credit for. She burns and she cares about the burning, both at once. That is not a contradiction. That is a whole person. Through this season and the next, as her relationship with Finn develops, we see these qualities deepen and complicate. She is learning, constantly learning. Learning what her fire does to things. Learning what words mean and which ones hurt. Learning how to be in a relationship with someone whose nature is fundamentally different from hers. Who does not run on fire but runs on something she cannot quite understand. Something warm but not hot. Something caring but not consuming. She makes friends, tentatively and imperfectly. She goes to the princess potluck. She meets Finn's circle and is simultaneously intensely curious about all of them and deeply uncertain how to be around them. She is building a social world from scratch, at an age when most people are already years into it, and she is doing it with the enormous emotional intensity that is her nature and the enormous social inexperience that is her damage. And somehow the two together produce something that is, unmistakably, Phoebe. Not the Fire Princess. Not Flame King's dangerous daughter. Not the elemental matrix instability that Princess Bubblegum worries about. Phoebe? A person. Curious and intense and sometimes burning things, and fundamentally, genuinely trying. The world hurts when you first touch it. It hurts you, and you hurt it, and the whole transaction is messy and expensive. But touching it is still better than the lantern. Every single time, touching it is better than the lantern. This is a truth Flame Princess arrives at slowly, through a series of touches that cost her and cost others around her. But she arrives at it. And once she is there, there is no going back to the glass walls. There is only moving forward with fire and intent and the steadily growing knowledge that her touch does not have to be destruction. It can also be warmth. Section 5, Burning Low, the philosophy of love that destroys. Here is a question that seems like it belongs in a physics textbook, but is actually one of the most intimate questions you can ask about another person. What happens when someone's capacity for love is so powerful, so elemental, so physically real that it could destroy the world? This is not metaphor. In Adventure Time's world, for Flame Princess, it is the literal situation. Her elemental matrix, the core physical structure that governs both her fire powers and her emotional states, is fundamentally unstable under conditions of intense romantic passion. The more she feels, the hotter she burns. The hotter she burns, the more destabilized her matrix becomes. And a fully destabilized Flame Princess elemental matrix, as Princess Bubblegum explains in Burning Low with the kind of calm scientific clarity that makes everything worse, would bore a hole through the Earth's crust to the planet's core, at which point Flame Princess would be caught in the gravitational flux and continue to burn until she melted the planet from inside. So, when Flame Princess falls truly, deeply, passionately in love, the planet ends. That is one of the most elegantly terrible metaphors the show ever constructs, and it does it with a completely straight face embedded in an episode that also has Jake making bacon pancakes while obliviously singing about it. Let's talk about what this actually means, though. Not the mechanics. The mechanics are almost beside the point, but the underlying philosophical territory the show is exploring through this particular constraint on Flame Princess's existence. What does it mean to have a capacity for feeling so powerful that it cannot be safely expressed in the world as currently constituted? What does it mean to love someone knowing that the full experience of that love would be catastrophic? What does it mean to hold yourself back not because you do not feel, but because feeling too fully destroys things? Flame Princess is not the first or only character in fiction to have this problem. It is a recognizable experience, actually, even without the fire mechanics. The feeling that your emotions are too big for the space you occupy, that the full expression of what you feel would be more than the people around you can handle, that you have to manage yourself, contain yourself, not for your own comfort, but for the safety of others. This is a feeling that people carry, often people who were taught from childhood that their feelings were dangerous, were too much, needed to be controlled and moderated and reduced. Where did Flame Princess learn that her feelings were dangerous? She learned it in the Lantern. She learned it from 14 years of being contained specifically because of what she was. She learned it from a father who told her that the intensity of her nature was a threat to everyone around her. She internalized the lesson before she ever had the chance to test whether it was true. And then she came out of the Lantern and started to learn that some of it, at least, was true. Not because her nature is evil, but because her nature is genuinely physically powerful in ways that the world is not always equipped to handle. She burns things when she is upset. She really did. And Bubblegum is not entirely wrong that the elemental matrix instability is real and dangerous. These are not fabrications. They are facts about Flame Princess's situation. But there is a difference between a fact and a sentence, between a limitation and a condemnation. Burning Low is the episode where Flame Princess and Finn have to confront this distinction directly, and where the show makes something very clear about the ethics of limitation. Bubblegum finds out that Finn and Flame Princess are getting more serious, that they have kissed multiple times. And she attempts to stop it, not because she is jealous, though Finn and Jake initially assume jealousy and the episode toys with that reading, but because she genuinely believes that the relationship poses an existential risk. That if Flame Princess experiences the full intensity of romantic passion, the chain reaction that follows is not metaphorical heartbreak, but actual planetary catastrophe. Bubblegum is not lying about the science. The science is real. But what the episode asks you to sit with is the ethics of what she is doing. She is attempting to control the intimate life of another person without telling that person why, based on her calculation of the probable outcomes. She is making the decision for Flame Princess about what Flame Princess is allowed to feel and experience based on risk assessment. She is being, in her way, the Lantern all over again. Smaller, smarter, better intentioned. But functionally the same. And the show does not let her off easy for this. Finn's initial reaction, fury, the accusation that Bubblegum is jealous, the refusal to accept her authority over his relationship, is wrong in its specific reading, but right in its instinct. Someone is trying to control Flame Princess's emotional life again, and the fact that this person is doing it out of concern rather than cruelty does not make it categorically different. This is a philosophically loaded distinction. The road to someone's containment can be paved with genuine good intentions, and the containment can still be wrong. Bubblegum's fear is real. The risk she is calculating is real. But Flame Princess has a right to know the risk and to make her own choices about it. She has a right to information about her own nature, not just to the conclusions that information leads Bubblegum to draw. She is not a variable in someone else's equation. She is a person. When the catastrophe is eventually averted, in a complicated and somewhat rushed resolution involving Finn jumping into the hole Flame Princess burns and the water extinguishing the runaway reaction, the aftermath is interesting. Flame Princess is upset, yes, but the primary quality of what she is experiencing is not helplessness. She is thinking. She is processing. She is, in the aftermath of near apocalypse, trying to understand what her own nature actually is and what it means for the kind of life she is going to be able to lead. That is not a small thing. Most people, in the immediate aftermath of discovering that their feelings could destroy the world, would experience something much more like shutdown. Flame Princess reaches toward understanding. Even here, even in this, she is trying to know herself better. There is something in Burning Low about the relationship between constraint and identity that deserves attention. The episode argues implicitly that the constraint is real. Flame Princess really cannot express the full intensity of romantic love without catastrophic consequences, and that this constraint is genuinely unfair. She did not choose this. She was born this way. The universe handed her a capacity for feeling alongside a physical architecture that makes the full expression of that feeling dangerous. She gets to feel the weight of the emotion without getting to have the release that the emotion naturally seeks. This is a specific and cruel kind of limitation. And yet the episode also does not frame the constraint as the end of the story. It does not say, well, you are broken, and therefore love is simply not for you. It says that the constraint is real, and that working within it will require creativity and care and a different kind of intimacy, one built more on presence and understanding, and the specific architecture of what two people can give each other safely, rather than on the unconstrained expression of passion. It says that limitation is not the same as impossibility, that there are ways to love in the space that constraint creates. Finn and Flame Princess stay together after this. They work with the tinfoil hugs and the careful distance and the things they are able to share without triggering the matrix instability. It is imperfect and effortful and not what either of them would choose if they could choose freely. But it is real. And it is theirs. Right up until the moment when Finn makes a choice that breaks it entirely. Section 6. Frost and Fire, Betrayal and the Death of Trust. Everything Flame Princess has been building from the moment she stepped out of the lantern. Every tiny increment of safety, every hard-won social skill, every small trust, rests on a foundation that she does not know is there until it is removed. And that foundation is the belief, never consciously articulated, that the people who say they care about her are actually telling her the truth. She grew up inside a lie, inside the performance of containment that her father called protection, inside the institutionalized deception of a kingdom that told her she was evil while spending enormous energy making her think she had no alternative. She did not know when she came out of the lantern that she was carrying the particular vulnerability of someone who has never learned to detect lies, because no one in her world ever told her the truth. She had no calibration, no template for what honest affection looks and feels like. She was building that calibration slowly, through her relationship with Finn, learning what it felt like to have someone reliably be what they said they were. Then Frost and Fire happened. The setup is almost painfully simple in its specifics and catastrophic in its implications. Finn has a dream. In the dream, Flame Princess and Ice King fight each other, and the dream is exciting to him in a way that his waking self becomes somewhat embarrassed about. The show handles this with enormous tact, gesturing at the reality of adolescent dreaming without being gratuitous about it. The cosmic owl is in the dream, which means it is prophetic, which means Jake interprets it as real and consequential, and Finn becomes obsessed with seeing the dream through to its conclusion. So Finn manipulates Flame Princess and Ice King into fighting each other. Not once, multiple times, using deception, sending anonymous letters, orchestrating confrontations while pretending not to be involved, lying repeatedly and deliberately to someone who trusted him precisely because he had always been honest with her. And Flame Princess finds out, because of course she finds out. The show does not give Finn the comfort of a clean escape. She finds out, and the look on her face in that moment is one of the most devastating things in the entire series. Not just hurt, not just anger, something deeper and more final than either. The particular expression of someone who has just had their model of the world revised, who has just discovered that the thing they built their safety on was built on sand. She had been learning, carefully and slowly, what it meant to trust someone. She had been taking the risk of extending that trust further and further as the evidence accumulated that Finn was what he said he was. Honest. Good. Someone who cared about her genuinely. She had been using Finn as the template for what a person you can trust looks and feels like, because she had never had one before. And he lied to her. Not from malice, not because he wanted to hurt her, because he was a self-absorbed adolescent who let his own entertainment override his understanding of what his actions would cost her, which is a very human reason to lie and also not a mitigating one. What happens next? The immediate, enormous, fully justified anger that ends their relationship is sometimes read as Flame Princess overreacting, as proof that she cannot control herself, that the elemental instability is a character flaw rather than a physical reality, that she is too much for anyone to handle. This reading is wrong, and it is worth spending a moment to explain why it is wrong. Flame Princess does not break up with Finn because she has poor emotional regulation. She breaks up with Finn because he lied to her repeatedly and deliberately, and because she understands exactly what that means. She is not reacting with disproportionate intensity. She is reacting with exactly the intensity appropriate to the actual thing that happened. Finn did not make a small mistake. He violated the foundational trust of their relationship multiple times, using her as a means to his entertainment. The relationship ending is the correct response to this. The ending is not the failure of Flame Princess's emotional regulation. The ending is Flame Princess's emotional intelligence working perfectly. Here is the thing about betrayal and someone who grew up in the circumstances Flame Princess grew up in. Betrayal is not just the immediate hurt of this specific lie. Betrayal, for someone with her history, is the revision of an entire model of reality. If Finn was capable of lying to her, then everything she thought she knew about what safety and trust feel like needs to be reconsidered. The calibration she was building, the growing internal sense of what an honest relationship is, what a caring person acts like, what she can reasonably expect from someone who says they love her, has just been called into question at its foundation. That is enormous. That is not overreaction. That is the rational response to finding out that the map you were building was based on faulty data. What she does with that enormous feeling is instructive. She does not collapse. She does not retreat to the lantern, literally or metaphorically. She does not conclude that all people are untrustworthy and that isolation is the only safe option. She ends the relationship, yes, with fire and finality. But she does not end herself. She does not stop growing. She processes the betrayal, and she carries it, and she moves, however haltingly, forward. And forward, for Flame Princess after the breakup, means inward, means toward herself and her own kingdom, and the question she has been half-forming for years about who she actually is when she is not defined by her relationship to Finn. Means toward the hard work of figuring out what kind of ruler and what kind of person she wants to be, independently of what anyone else has told her she should be. Frost and Fire is, in some ways, the end of Flame Princess's first chapter. It is the end of the story of Flame Princess as Finn's girlfriend, as the girl from the lantern who was given a chance at a normal life by a heroic boy who liked her. That story was real, and it mattered. It gave her so much. The language of connection, the experience of being seen and cared for, the expanding sense of her own capacity for relationship. She would not have become who she becomes without it. But it was always a chapter, not the whole story. And the end of that chapter, as devastating as it is in the moment, is also the beginning of something much more fully hers. The beginning of Phoebe. Not Finn's girlfriend, not Flame King's dangerous daughter, not Princess Bubblegum's contained elemental risk. Just Phoebe. Learning finally, with all the difficulty and all the cost and all the fire that implies, what it means to belong to herself. Section 7. Earth and Water. The turn inward. After the breakup with Finn, something changes in Flame Princess's trajectory. Before, even when she was growing and learning and challenging her father's label of evil, her arc was largely oriented outward. Toward Finn, toward Ooh, toward the experience of being in the world and learning it from the outside-eyed. Her growth was reactive, triggered by situations she found herself in, shaped by relationships she had formed, driven by the experience of encounter. After Frost and Fire, the orientation shifts. It becomes reflexive. It turns toward herself. This is not a dramatic transformation. It is quiet and gradual and expressed more in what she begins asking than in what she does. The questions she starts carrying are different. Not what is this world and how do I fit into it, but who am I and what do I actually want? Not what does Finn need from me or what does my father say I am, but what does Phoebe believe? What does she value? What kind of ruler does she want to be? What kind of person? Earth and Water is the episode that makes this explicit, and it does it with elegant structure. Princess Bubblegum, pursuing her own scientific interest in understanding fire elementals, takes Flame Princess through a series of tests. Not tests of power, tests of emotion, of response, of the relationship between feeling and elemental expression. She is trying to map the emotional architecture. To understand scientifically what makes Flame Princess tick. What happens during these tests is that Flame Princess, who is nominally the subject, ends up doing more genuine self-exploration than Bubblegum's instruments can measure. She is answering Bubblegum's questions, yes, but she is also simultaneously discovering that the questions are worth asking, that paying attention to the patterns of her own emotional responses, to what makes the fire rise, to what calms it, to what the relationship between her feelings and her elemental expression actually is genuinely illuminating. Not just scientifically useful, personally liberating. And then Cinnamon Bun lets slip the truth about the lantern, about the actual sequence of events that led to her imprisonment, about Princess Bubblegum's role in it. This is a huge moment, and the show handles it well. Flame Princess finds out that the person she has been allowing to study her, to run tests on her, to try to establish a working relationship with her, is the same person who, when Phoebe was an infant, wandering laughing through a forest, decided to put her back in a box. Bubblegum made the call. Bubblegum told Flame King to lock her up. Bubblegum is the reason 14 years happened inside a lantern. How Flame Princess responds to this information is philosophically significant. She does not immediately incinerate Bubblegum, which she would have the full right and the full physical capability to do. She does not collapse into helpless rage. She is furious, yet deeply, genuinely, entirely, understandably furious. But she uses the fury. She takes that enormous fire and she directs it with a precision that was simply not available to her when she first came out of the lantern toward the action that needs to happen. She goes home. She confronts her father, and she does what everyone who knew her story has been waiting for her to do for multiple seasons. She traps him in the lantern, not viciously, not with cruelty, with the clean, almost inevitable logic of someone righting a profound wrong using exactly the instrument through which the wrong was done. Here is your cage, she says without words. Here is what you built. I have outgrown it. You wear it now. And then she takes the throne. There is something about the way this moment plays out that is worth slowing down for. Flame Princess does not become queen through ambition. She does not want power the way her father wants power. She does not take the throne because she believes she deserves it more than he does. In the competitive zero-sum framework that has defined Fire Kingdom politics since before she was born. She takes it because she has looked at what the Fire Kingdom is and what it could be, and she has decided that she wants to try to make it the second thing rather than the first. That is a completely different motivation from anything the Fire Kingdom has ever been governed by. The Fire Kingdom has always been ruled by whoever was strongest, most ruthless, most willing to use power as an end in itself, in Moaz. Flame Princess, who is genuinely more powerful than anyone in the kingdom, who could, if she chose, rule through sheer force in a way that makes Flame King look like a regional manager, chooses instead to rule through something else, through earned trust, through demonstrated care, through the philosophy so alien to this place that a ruler exists to serve their people rather than to consume them. She is the daughter of a culture that taught her that power is the only value. And she is choosing, deliberately, consciously, having thought about it and tested it and experienced the alternative, to govern by a different value entirely. That is not nothing. That is one of the most radical things a person can do. To grow up inside a system and refuse to replicate the system's values when you are given the opportunity to. To have been handed the tools of dominance and choose instead to build something different. To say, I have seen what this kingdom is, and I have seen what I am, and these two things are not the same, and I am going to spend the rest of my reign proving that. The earth and water of the episode's title deserve attention too. The episode, structured as a contrast between two elements, fire and water, maps onto the contrast between two modes of being that Flame Princess has spent the whole series negotiating. Tar, intense, consuming, in constant motion, transforming everything it touches. Water, flowing, finding its own level, wearing things down slowly, giving life as much as taking it. She cannot be water. She was not made to be water. But the episode suggests that she can learn from water, can find in herself the quality that water has, the patience, the persistence, the willingness to move around obstacles rather than burning through them, and integrate it with her fire. That integration, water into fire without extinguishing either, is what she is building at the end of earth and water. Not a flame princess who is no longer fire. A flame princess who is fire and more besides. Who carries the warmth and the light and the transformative power, and also the patience and the care and the long-term thinking of someone who has decided to build something that lasts. With Cinnamon Bun by her side. This deserves a moment, because the relationship between Flame Princess and Cinnamon Bun is one of the most quietly beautiful things in the series. He is simple, earnest, completely loyal, and asks nothing from her except to be useful to her cause. He does not have agendas. He does not calculate. He is just there, fully present, genuinely caring, in the uncomplicated way that Phoebe has almost never experienced from anyone. He becomes her knight. He pledges himself to her, not because of her power, but because of what he has seen in her, the goodness, the striving, the willingness to try. He loves her, in whatever way a partially baked magical cinnamon pastry is capable of love, with the same unreserved openness that she once extended to Finn. And she receives it. She lets it in. She holds his hand and walks back toward her throne while her people cheer. That is the image the episode leaves you with. Not fire and fury, not the conqueror returning in triumph. Just a young woman, newly crowned, holding the hand of the person who believes in her, walking towards something she has chosen for herself. Toward a future she is going to build on her own terms, with her own values, using her own fire. That is what 14 years in the Lantern was trying to prevent. That was what the evil whispered in the dark was trying to prevent. That specific image, that specific freedom. A Phoebe who gets to decide for herself what she is and what she does with what she is. She walks toward the throne, her people cheer. The Lantern sits behind her with her father inside it, and she does not look back. Section 8, the cooler. Statecraft, paranoia, and the honest ruler. Once Flame Princess becomes the ruler of the Fire Kingdom, something about her character arc changes in nature. It does not become less interesting. If anything, it becomes more so. But the stakes shift. The questions she is asking are no longer purely personal. They are political, relational in the large sense, between kingdoms and peoples, rather than between individuals. The philosophy of fire becomes, in part, the philosophy of how fire governs. And this is where the contrast between Flame Princess and Princess Bubblegum becomes one of the show's richest ongoing arguments. Bubblegum is older, more experienced, more thoroughly educated in the theory and practice of statecraft. She has been ruling the Candy Kingdom for a very long time, longer actually than almost anyone knows, since her effective age is much greater than her apparent one. She has developed, through that long tenure, a governing philosophy that is sophisticated, effective, and also quietly terrifying when you examine it from the outside. She controls. She monitors. She manages her population's information environment to prevent panic and maintain stability. She makes decisions on behalf of her people that her people are not asked to ratify or even know about. She acts from genuine care and genuine intelligence, and she produces genuine results. And she does it through methods that would, if anyone noticed them clearly, constitute significant violations of trust. This is the context for the episode The Cooler, which is Adventure Time's most explicit meditation on the politics of trust and the ethics of fear-based governance. The setup: the Fire Kingdom is experiencing a mysterious cold snap. The Fire citizens are weakening, their flames are dimming. Flame Princess, who cannot find the cause, does something that costs her enormously in pride and uncertainty. She calls Princess Bubblegum. She asks for help. Explicitly, vulnerably, knowing full well that Bubblegum is not her friend, and knowing that needing her assistance puts her at a disadvantage. But she asks, because her people need help, and asking for help is the right thing to do. What the viewer knows, and what Flame Princess does not know, is that the cold snap is Bubblegum's doing. She hired Ice King to freeze the Fire Kingdom's core because she wanted an opportunity to inspect and dismantle the Fire Kingdom's secret weapons, the sleeping fire giants, which she considers an existential threat to the Candy Kingdom. She manufactured the crisis in order to be invited in to solve it. She is, from the beginning of the episode, running a deception operation on someone who called her for help. This is Princess Bubblegum at her most morally compromised. And to the show's credit, it does not excuse it. The episode is not ambiguous about whether what Bubblegum is doing is wrong. It is wrong. The analysis Bubblegum uses to justify it: the Fire Kingdom has weapons. Those weapons could destroy the Candy Kingdom. I need to neutralize the threat. Is the logic of preemptive warfare and surveillance capitalism, and every government that has ever decided that its fear of another party justifies doing to that party whatever it considers necessary. It is the logic that has produced enormous suffering in real human history, and the show traces its shape accurately. What makes the episode philosophically complex, rather than just a verdict on Bubblegum, is that Bubblegum is not wrong about the threat. The sleeping fire giants are real. They are genuinely capable of the destruction she fears. The Fire Kingdom does have citizens who actively want to use them against the Candy Kingdom, her brother's faction, the warriors who see every neighboring kingdom as a potential conquest. The threat is not imaginary. The fear is not irrational. But Flame Princess's position is equally clear. The giants are a defensive weapon. They exist to protect the kingdom in times of crisis. She calls them the kingdom's sacred protectors. She has no intention of using them aggressively. She is governing a kingdom that has a history of violence, but is, under her rule, actively moving away from that history. She is trying to build something different from what her father built. And Bubblegum, operating from fear and assumption, is preventing that by refusing to trust the evidence of who Flame Princess is. The confrontation between them, when Flame Princess discovers what Bubblegum has done, is one of the most affecting in the series. Flame Princess asks directly and furiously why Bubblegum cannot just trust her. And Bubblegum, who is genuinely frightened and genuinely convinced she was doing what the situation required, says essentially, because I cannot afford to take the risk. Because the cost of being wrong is too high. And here is where the show makes its clearest political statement. Bubblegum's reasoning, the cost of trust is too high when the stakes are this large, is exactly the reasoning that has produced every act of political oppression in history. It is the reasoning that says, your right to be treated as trustworthy is subordinate to my need to feel safe. It is the reasoning that built the lantern. Different materials, same logic. Flame Princess's response to being betrayed this second time, because this is a second betrayal after Finn, and it is a political one, is not to become what Bubblegum feared. She does not weaponize the Fire Kingdom against Candy Kingdom. She does not escalate. She confronts, honestly and directly. She tells Bubblegum that she is a bad person, not a monster, not an enemy, a bad person, which is a very specific moral judgment. Someone who does wrong things despite knowing better. Someone whose intelligence and care are real, but are being deployed in service of fear rather than justice. And then, because Flame Princess is Flame Princess and not Princess Bubblegum, she extends the hand toward reconciliation anyway. She does not forget what happened, she does not pretend to, but she chooses not to let the betrayal determine the entire future of the relationship between their kingdoms. She chooses, consciously, to be honest about what she feels, and simultaneously open to the possibility that trust can be rebuilt. This is a philosophical position that is much harder to hold than either pure forgiveness or pure severance. It requires you to simultaneously acknowledge harm, hold the perpetrator of that harm accountable, and remain open to the ongoing relationship. It requires you to be a specific kind of person, someone with enough clarity to name wrong clearly and enough generosity to stay in the room anyway. Flame Princess has that clarity. She has that generosity. She has them not because she is naively optimistic about human God, or candy, or fire, nature, but because she has chosen, deliberately as a governing philosophy, to lead with trust, to operate from the position that her people and her neighbors deserve to be treated as trustworthy until they demonstrate otherwise. Not as a tactic, not as naivety, as a genuine moral commitment to the idea that you cannot build a kingdom worth living in by treating everyone around you as a threat. She lets Bubblegum leave with one of the fire giants still functioning. She could have confiscated everything. She could have escalated. She leaves her something. Because she knows that Bubblegum's fear is real, and she knows that you do not eliminate fear through force. You eliminate it through demonstration, through being, consistently and over time, exactly who you say you are. That is the philosophy of the honest ruler, not the naive ruler, not the ruler who trusts blindly. The ruler who has chosen transparency as a foundational value, not because it is always safe, but because it is the only thing that builds the kind of relationship between a ruler and their people, and between kingdoms, that can sustain itself over time. Flame King ruled through power and fear and produced a kingdom that was one strong challenger away from collapse, which is why it collapsed the moment Flame Princess challenged him. Flame Princess rules through trust and earned loyalty and produces something more durable. Something that can survive bad harvests, failed alliances, even the deliberate sabotage of neighbors acting from fear. Because it is built on something real. On the actual relationship between her and her people, not on the performance of dominance. The contrast between her and Bubblegum in the cooler is not ultimately a judgment of Bubblegum. Bubblegum is trying to protect what she loves, which is admirable. She is doing it through methods that corrode the very thing she is trying to protect, which is tragic. The show has the wisdom to hold both things. It does not simplify either ruler. It asks you to see both clearly, the genuine care and the genuine wrong, the good intent and the corrupted method. What it offers through Flame Princess is not a perfect solution to the dilemma Bubblegum faces. It offers a different orientation to the problem. A governing philosophy that says, the risk of trust is real and the cost of distrust is also real, and the second cost tends to compound in ways that are not immediately visible but are ultimately catastrophic. That choosing trust, even when it is frightening, is not naivety. It is the long game, the game that produces something worth ruling. Section 9. Fire as Art, the voice that was always there. There is a version of Flame Princess's story that ends with governance. That says, she grew up, she took her throne, she became a reasonable and relatively just ruler, and that is the resolution. The dangerous elemental was domesticated into an effective monarch. Problem solved, arc completed, everyone goes home. That version exists in some readings of the show, but it misses something fundamental, something the show keeps insisting on across the final seasons, something that is perhaps the most philosophically interesting thing about Phoebe as a character. She needs to make things, not just rule, not just govern, not just apply fire in service of governance and defense and political alliance. She needs to create. She needs to take what she feels, that enormous, continuous, generating fire of her inner life, and shape it into something that communicates what that fire is like from the inside. She needs, in other words, to be an artist. The specific art form she discovers is rap, which seems initially like one of Adventure Time's more absurd choices. A fire princess doing freestyle rap? But the more you think about it, the more inevitable it becomes. Because rap, as an art form, is fundamentally about exactly what Flame Princess has been doing her entire life. It is about the intense, rhythmic, precisely controlled expression of an inner life that is too large for ordinary speech. It is about turning passion into form, about taking the burning and making it into something structured and shareable without burning the thing you want to share it with. The episode Son of Rap Bear, Flame Princess's last solo-focused episode in the main series, is sometimes dismissed as a quirky standalone in a season full of quirky standalones. But it is doing something genuinely interesting. Flame Princess is participating in open mic nights. She is writing and performing her own material. She is standing in front of an audience and sharing, voluntarily, the stuff that is inside her, not performing a role assigned to her by birth or by relationship, but expressing something that belongs entirely to herself. This is philosophically enormous when you put it next to the lantern. In the lantern, Flame Princess had no means of expression. She could not share what was inside her with the world, because the world had erected a barrier between herself and her, between what she felt and what could be communicated. The lantern was not just a physical prison, it was a silencing. 14 years of not having a voice because there was no one to hear it, no medium in which to project it, no form that her intensity could take that the world could receive without burning. Art is the form. Art, in all its specific and various manifestations, is the discovery that there is a way to take the thing that is inside you. The fire, the feeling, the enormity of what it is to be alive in the particular way you are alive, and give it a shape that other people can encounter without being destroyed by it. That is what art does. That is, in some philosophical traditions, the entire point of art. It is the controlled expression of the uncontrollable, the shaped offering of what would otherwise just burn. When Flame Princess raps, she is not just performing. She is discovering that her fire has a voice, that the intensity she has spent her whole life managing and channeling and trying not to hurt people with can also be a gift, can also be beautiful, can also be something that people want to stand close to, that warms rather than consumes, that illuminates rather than blinds. The specific episode involves a high-stakes rap battle that she is pushed into, and it involves her having to find her own authentic voice rather than just mastering technique. She initially tries to win by being technically better than her opponent, and it does not work. Then she finds the thing she actually has to say, the stuff about her father, about growing up in a lantern, about the specific texture of her particular fire, and that works. That is what wins. Not the technique, but the truth. The specific, irreducible, only Phoebe truth of what she has lived. There is a beautiful irony in the fact that what Flame King tried so hard to keep her from being, expressive, visible, powerful in her own right, a force in the world on her own terms, is exactly what she becomes when she finds her voice as an artist. The lantern was supposed to silence her. But you cannot silence fire entirely. You can only bank it, and banked fire, given enough time, burns hotter than fire that was never constrained. The specific form rap takes, the rhythm, the directness, the personal testimony, the social commentary, the way it historically has given voice to people who were told they had no voice worth hearing, is not incidental to Flame Princess's choice of it. She gravitates toward the art form that was specifically built for what she has to say. An art form born of constraint and limitation and the refusal to be silenced. An art form that takes the raw material of a specific, often painful, always particular life and turns it into something universal. Something that people who have never lived your experience can hear and recognize in themselves. Her art is an extension of her governance philosophy. It is another form of the honest ruler, of the person who chooses transparency and directness and the willingness to be seen, because those things build the real connections that sustain real worlds. When she stands at a microphone and raps about her father, she is doing the same thing she does when she confronts Princess Bubblegum directly, instead of retaliating through force. She is choosing truth, choosing visibility, choosing to let people see what is actually there. And what is there is extraordinary. What is there has always been extraordinary. The fire, the passion, the enormous emotional intensity, the capacity for love and fury and creation in equal measure, the specific genius of being the most powerful fire elemental in the kingdom, and choosing to spend that power on honesty rather than dominance. What is there has always been there. It just needed a form that the world could receive. In the broader context of Adventure Time's treatment of creativity and expression, the show that gave us Marceline's music as processed grief, BMO's games as philosophical thought experiments, Jake's shapeshifting as improvisational art, Flame Princess as rapper queen is a deeply coherent addition. Every character in this world who grows into their full self eventually finds the creative form that is native to their particular way of being alive. For Flame Princess, that form is the one that takes fire and turns it into rhythm and truth, and the kind of warmth that does not burn. It took her a long time to find it. It took coming out of the lantern and trying and failing and getting her heart broken, and taking a throne and confronting betrayal and all of the rest. It took, in other words, living. Really living in the world, with all of the damage and discovery that living entails. The art was always in her. The voice was always there. She just needed enough of the world to push against before she could find the shape of what she had to say. That, too, is a philosophical argument. One that Adventure Time makes quietly through Flame Princess and loudly through the pattern of who in this world creates and what it costs them to create. The argument that art is not the product of comfort, it is the product of fire, of living with enough intensity that the interior life demands a form, of having enough inside you that it has to come out, and being lucky enough, or determined enough, or simply stubborn enough to find the form that lets it come out as something other than destruction. Section 10. Phoebe. Who she became. Her name is Phoebe. This is revealed quietly and with appropriate weight in the episode The Cooler, when Flame Princess tells Bubblegum her real name. Not as an act of naivety, not as an attempt to make them friends, as a statement, as the declaration of a self that exists beyond all the titles and labels and roles and designations that have been applied to her by others, beyond Flame Princess, beyond the dangerous elemental, beyond Finn's girlfriend, beyond the Fire Queen. Just Phoebe. The name she was presumably given at birth before any of the rest of it, before the lantern and the conditioning and the prophecies and the political instrumentalization of her existence. The name that belongs to her before she belongs to anything else. Phoebe. Named, as one analysis notes, with resonance from the Greek sun god Phoebus Apollo. The name of a figure associated with light and truth and the illumination of hidden things. A name that fits her, if you think about it exactly. Someone whose nature is light, whose governance philosophy is transparency, whose art form is truth-telling, whose whole arc has been the slow emergence from darkness into visibility. Phoebe, the one who illuminates. Let's talk about who she is when the series ends. Not just what she has accomplished, though what she has accomplished is considerable, but who she is as a philosophical being, as a character whose inner life has been the real story all along. She is Queen of the Fire Kingdom, a ruler who has transformed the most inherently violent kingdom in Oo into something approaching stable and humane. She has not eliminated the Fire Kingdom's nature. It is still fire, still intense, still capable of enormous force. But she has channeled that nature toward protection rather than predation. Her people are loyal to her not because she is stronger than them, though she is, but because she is genuinely trying to govern in their interest. That is rare in any world. It is essentially unprecedented in the Fire Kingdom. She is Cinnamon Bun's person. This relationship, which grows slowly and quietly through the later seasons, is one of the most understated and sweet things in the show. He is not a great warrior. He is not a strategic genius. He is not complex or difficult or damaged in ways that create dramatic tension. He is simply good. Simply, wholeheartedly, uncomplicated in his goodness. And she, who has been surrounded by complicated people with hidden agendas and structural deceptions, and the Fire Kingdom's endemic culture of betrayal, she needs that. She needs the person who is exactly what they say they are, who loves her without conditions and asks nothing from her except to let him stand beside her. The relationship works partly because Flame Princess has learned, through Finn and through her father and through Bubblegum, what bad faith care looks and feels like. She has the calibration now. She can tell the difference between the person who claims to care about her and the person who actually does. Cinnamon Bun is unmistakably the latter, and she receives that love with a generosity and fullness that would not have been available to her at 14, freshly emerged from the lantern with no template for trust. She has the template now. She built it herself, through years of getting it wrong and getting it right, and getting it wrong again and learning from every version. She is an artist, a freestyle rapper who performs at open mic nights and writes lyrics about the specific texture of her specific life. Who has found in the precision and rhythm and truth-telling of that form a way to be fire without burning the world down? Who has discovered that the thing that makes her feel most like herself, the intensity, the directness, the unwillingness to soften the truth of her experience for an audience that might find it uncomfortable, is also the thing that makes people want to hear her? That her particular fire in the right form is exactly what other people need: warmth and light, and the revelation that someone else also burns like this, and survived it, and made something beautiful out of it. She is the fire elemental. This designation, which we learn in the Elementals arc, places her in a lineage of beings who embody fire not just physically but cosmically, who are, in some fundamental sense, the universe's fire, concentrated in a single being. This gives her story a scope that is easy to miss in the individual episodes, but becomes clear when you step back and look at the full arc. She is not just a princess who grew up in a lantern. She is one of the 4 elemental forces that constitute the reality of Ooh. She is, in some sense, as fundamental to the existence of this world as Princess Bubblegum's candy life force or Slime Princess's binding principle or Turtle Princess's water. She is the transformation, the continuous change, the force that turns one thing into another and does not apologize for what it destroys in the process. And she governs that force. She embodies it not as an conscious natural process, but as a person who has made choices about what to do with it, who has considered the options available to someone constituted entirely by the most transformative force in nature, and has chosen to transform toward growth rather than ruin. Who has looked at what fire can do, at the full range of it, from the ash it leaves, to the life it clears space for, to the warmth it produces, to the light it offers, and decided that the warmth and the light and the cleared space for new growth are worth the ash, are worth the kadibai, are worth being fire. That decision, made consciously, repeatedly, in the face of evidence both for and against it, is the philosophical center of her character. It is the answer she arrives at to the question the show has been asking since she first stepped out of the lantern. What does it mean to be constituted by something dangerous? It means that you choose what to do with it. It means that the dangerous thing and the good thing are not opposites, but aspects of the same force. And that wisdom lies not in eliminating the danger, but in understanding it well enough to direct it towards something that creates rather than simply consumes. She chose this. Flame King did not choose it. Princess Bubblegum's advice certainly did not choose it for her. Finn's love did not choose it for her, though it helped her practice the choosing. She chose it herself. One small refusal at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of not being what she was told she was. Until the accumulated weight of those choices became a self. Became Phoebe. Became the queen who governs through trust, and the artist who illuminates through truth, and the elemental who embodies the fire that burns toward life. There is something the show does, almost in passing, that I think is one of its deepest gestures. In the final seasons, when Flame Princess has grown into her role as queen, her fire is different. It is still powerful. It is still immediately, genuinely dangerous. She has not become tame. But there is a quality in it that was not there when she first came out of the lantern. A steadiness, a purposefulness. When she burns now, it is because she has decided to burn, and she has decided toward a specific end. The fire is still fully hers, still wild in its nature, still capable of the enormous destructive power that made her father put her in glass. But it is aimed, directed, chosen. That is not suppression. That is not the fire being constrained from outside, the lantern reimagined as self-control. That is the fire being understood from inside, being held by someone who knows what it is and what it can do and what it is for. Being wielded by someone who loves what she is, including the terrible parts of what she is, and has decided to spend that love on making something that lasts. Phoebe, fire elemental, queen of the fire kingdom, artist, survivor, the girl who was locked in a lantern and learned to illuminate the whole world. She is one of the most beautifully and honestly drawn characters in Adventure Time. She asks questions the show cares about identity and conditioning and the relationship between nature and choice, about what good governance looks like when the governor is constitutively powerful, about whether someone can escape the story that was told about them before they could form their own narrative. She answers those questions through living, through action, through the accumulation of chosen goodness against the grain of everything that tried to make her something else. The lantern is behind her. It has been behind her for a long time now. It recedes further with each season, with each episode, with each choice she makes that belongs entirely to herself. She does not need to burn it. She does not need to destroy it. It simply ceases to matter in the face of everything she has built and become, the way all prisons eventually become irrelevant to the people who outlive them. She steps into the fire she always was, and she shines. There is something about Phoebe's story that I think we all carry a version of. Not the literal lantern. Most of us were not imprisoned in enchanted glassware as infants. But the feeling of being too much for the space you were given. Of being told that the most essential thing about you is actually the most dangerous thing about you. Of growing up with someone else's story about who you are so thoroughly embedded in your self-understanding that it takes years to find the edges of it, to notice where their story ends and yours begins. Flame Princess, across the whole arc of Adventure Time, demonstrates something very specific and very true about that experience. She demonstrates that the answer to being told you are too much is not to become less. The answer is to find the form that lets your too much become exactly enough. To develop the skill, the wisdom, the patience, the art, the governance, the relationships, to develop all the things that let you be fully what you are in a way that builds rather than destroys. She is fire. She was always fire. The question was never whether she would stop being fire. The question was always what the fire was for. And the answer, arrived at slowly and honestly and with real cost and real grace, is that the fire is for warmth, for light, for clearing the old deadwood so something new can grow, for illuminating the things that hid in darkness and needed to be seen, for the art that takes truth and makes it into something other people can stand close to without being burned. That is what she found in the lantern and outside it, and in the heartbreak and in the throne and in the open mic night, with the microphone in her hand and her whole specific, irreducible life in her lungs. The fire is for all of that. It always was. It was just waiting for her to discover it. If this video kept you company tonight or found you at just the right moment, I would genuinely love it if you left a like and subscribed. It makes a real difference, and knowing that someone out there is listening to these deep dives into the characters and ideas that make Adventure Time so special, that means everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about Phoebe. Get some rest. The fire keeps burning, even while you sleep. Interlude: The Philosophy of Elemental Identity. Before we leave Flame Princess behind, there is one more thread worth pulling, one that runs beneath the whole arc and surfaces in fragments throughout the series without ever being stated plainly. It is the question of what it means to be an elemental. Not just a person who can control an element, but a being who is constituted by one. A being who is, in the deepest sense, the element itself, given consciousness and choice and the capacity for growth. This is a distinction Adventure Time handles with unusual care. Flame Princess is not pyrokinetic in the way a superhero is pyrokinetic. She is not a normal person with an ability bolted on. She is fire given form. Her emotional states are fire. Her physical existence is fire. The line between what she feels and what she produces is not a line at all. It is a continuity. She is continuous with the fire she generates in a way that has no real analog in ordinary human experience, except perhaps the way artists sometimes describe their relationship to their medium. The painter who says the painting comes through them rather than from them. The musician who describes music as something they find rather than create. The sense of being a conduit for something that is both entirely yours and much larger than you. Flame Princess is the fire's consciousness, or the fire is Phoebe's nature. These two descriptions are interchangeable, and that interchangeability is the point. She does not have a firepower, she has a fire self. And the philosophical question of who you are when your self is an elemental force is one that Adventure Time never quite resolves because it cannot be resolved. It can only be lived through, navigated, given form. When the Elemental's arc in Season 9 makes this explicit, when we learn that Flame Princess is the fire elemental, the current vessel for fire's presence in the world of Ooh, part of a succession that includes past and future incarnations, it adds a temporal dimension to her identity that is dizzying when you really attend to it. She is Phoebe, specific, individual, irreplaceable. And she is also the current expression of something ancient and continuous, something that was fire before the Mushroom War and will be fire after whatever comes next. There were fire elementals before her. We see glimpses of them, shadows of previous lives, the accumulating tradition of what it has meant to be the fire's person across the history of Ooh. This does not diminish her individuality. The show is very clear about this. The fire elemental is not a role that erases the person who fills it. Phoebe's specific history, her specific choices, her specific relationships, these are not incidental to her role as elemental. They are how she fulfills it. She is the fire elemental in the specific way that only she can be, shaped by the lantern, and by Finn, and by earth and water, and by the throne, and by the open mic nights. No previous fire elemental was Phoebe. No future one will be. The elemental force of fire in Ooh is given different expression in each person who carries it. And what it means to be fire right now, in this age, in this world, that is Phoebe's answer to give. There is something profound in this about the relationship between the universal and the particular. The elemental fire is universal. It is fire itself, one of the four fundamental forces that constitute the reality of Ooh. But the way it lives in the world is always through a particular person, in a particular moment, shaped by a particular set of choices and relationships and scars and gifts. The universal never appears except through the particular. The fire never burns except as someone's fire, as Phoebe's fire. This means that when Phoebe chooses to be honest, when she chooses to govern through trust, when she chooses to make art instead of war, these are not just personal choices. They are how fire expresses itself in her era. They are fire's statement about what it is and what it is for, given voice through the specific consciousness of this specific person, which makes her choices not just personally meaningful, but cosmically significant. The fire of the world is, in some sense, saying something through the way she lives. And what it is saying through Phoebe is this: I am not only destruction, I am also transformation. I am also warmth. I am also the sacred center around which people gather in the dark. I am also art. I am also truth. I am all of these things, and the person who carries me can choose which of these things to be most fully. She chooses the warmth and the truth and the art. She chooses the fire that builds. And in choosing it, she teaches the fire what it can be when it is given a person wise enough and brave enough to choose that. That is not a small thing. That is one of the most significant things any consciousness can do with the force it was given. Interlude. The kingdom she built. There is a version of the Fire Kingdom that Flame King envisioned, one that is efficient and ruthless and governs through a mixture of fear and enforced loyalty. One where power flows cleanly from the strongest to the weakest, and everyone understands exactly where they stand in the hierarchy. One where the goal of governance is the perpetuation of the ruling power, rather than the well-being of the people being ruled. He almost had it, He was close to the version of the Fire Kingdom he wanted for most of his reign. He kept the dangerous elements contained, in his daughter's case, literally. He managed the political factions. He played one against the other. He survived. He produced a kingdom that was coherent enough to function and dangerous enough to be taken seriously. And the moment he was removed, the entire structure revealed how hollow it was. Because it was built on suppression and managed fear rather than genuine loyalty. When Flame Princess took the throne, she did not inherit a kingdom that loved its ruler. She inherited a kingdom that had been contained by its ruler, the way she had been contained by the Lantern. A kingdom full of citizens who had learned to perform compliance without internalizing it, who were waiting, collectively and without quite knowing they were waiting, for someone to tell them a different story about what the Fire Kingdom was. She told them that story. Slowly and imperfectly and through trial and error, she told them that story. The Fire Kingdom did not transform overnight. It is not, by the end of the series, some kind of paradise of equanimity. It is still fire. It is still volatile and intense and capable of violence. But it is directed by a ruler who genuinely cares whether her people thrive. And that difference, the single difference of a ruler's actual motivation, is enough to change the entire character of a kingdom over time. The citizens who had always been called evil by their own king discovered, under her rule, that they were not required to be evil, that their intensity and their passion and their fire nature could be expressed in forms other than predation and dominance. That belonging to a powerful kingdom did not require them to direct that power against the world. That being fire did not mean you had to burn everything. It could also mean you lit up the dark, warmed the cold, made space for other things to grow around your heat rather than burning them away. This is governance as philosophy, as the daily practice of an idea about what people are capable of and what they deserve. Every ruler embodies a philosophy of human nature, even the ones who are not consciously philosophical. Flame King's philosophy was that people are fundamentally self-interested and powerful, and that governance is the channeling of that self-interest through force. Flame Princess's philosophy is that people are capable of genuine loyalty when they are given genuine reason to be loyal, that they will rise to the values they are governed by if those values are honestly held and consistently demonstrated. Both philosophies find evidence in the world. Flame King was not hallucinating. The Fire Kingdom really was full of people who operated by exactly the competitive, power-seeking logic he governed by. They had been shaped by generations of being governed that way. But Phoebe looked at the same evidence and asked a different question. Not what are these people demonstrating, but what could they become if they were governed differently? If they were treated as people rather than fuel? If the ruler's fundamental stance toward them was care rather than management? The answer to that question is the Fire Kingdom under her rule. Imperfect, still recognizably fire, still prone to the occasional faction trying to recapture the old ways. We see this in the Red Throne, where Donjon attempts to usurp her throne through the traditional methods of the old Fire Kingdom, marriage by conquest and the weaponization of political instability. She defeats him not through greater ruthlessness, but through greater loyalty. Through having built, over her reign, enough genuine connection with her people that they reject the old model when it is presented to them. That is the payoff of governing through trust, not immediate security. The Lantern would have given her more immediate security, but durable loyalty, the kind that survives the challenge of a charismatic rival, because the people who are loyal to her are loyal to what she represents, not just to her power. They have seen what it looks like to be ruled by someone who actually cares about them. They choose it. They choose her. Not because they have no other option, but because they have considered the alternatives and found her better. She earned that, every single bit of it. She earned it through honesty and through being wrong sometimes, and admitting it, and through facing Bubblegum's betrayal and choosing reconciliation over war, and through all the small choices that nobody makes a big deal of, but that accumulate over time into a character and a kingdom and a reputation. She earned it the hard way, which is the only way that counts. Interlude. What she means. Here is what I come back to when I think about Flame Princess. When I turn the whole arc over in my mind and try to find the thing that makes her story matter beyond the world of Adventure Time, beyond the specific mechanics of fire elementals and the political dynamics of the Land of Oo, She is the argument that survival does not require suppression, that you can come through damage without becoming the damage, that the thing inside you that was treated as the most dangerous part of you can, given time and choice and the right form, become the most constructive part of you. She is the argument that healing is not the erasure of what you were made of. It is not becoming less fire. It is not cooling down or becoming more like water or learning to be the thing you were told you should have been. It is finding the way to be fully what you are with full consciousness and full choice behind the being. It is the fire choosing its own direction, the heat deciding what it warms. She is also, and this matters for the specific context of Adventure Time, the argument that children who were failed by the adults responsible for them, failed comprehensively and across multiple fronts by a father who wanted to shape her into a weapon, by a queen who decided at infancy that she needed to be contained, by an entire kingdom culture that told her what she was before she had the chance to find out herself. That those children can still become through their own effort and their own choices, and the small lifelines thrown to them by people who genuinely tried. Something whole and something extraordinary and something entirely their own. That is the most hopeful argument in the whole series. More hopeful than the cosmology, more hopeful than the eventual fate of Ooh, more hopeful than the love stories that ended well or the friendships that survived everything they were put through. The most hopeful thing in Adventure Time is Phoebe, the fire elemental, who was locked in a lantern and told she was evil and came out burning everything in her path and, through years of trying and failing and trying again, became the honest queen and the faithful friend and the artist and the ruler and the person who knows her own name. She is not a perfect character in the sense of having a complete or satisfying arc. The show itself acknowledges, in the texture of the final seasons, that there was more of her story to tell than they had time to tell it. She deserved more episodes, a richer exploration of what her queenship actually looked like day to day. More time with Cinnamon Bun, more rap battles, more moments of governance as philosophy in action. The show gave her what it could, and what it gave her is enough to work with. Enough to understand who she is and what she chose and why it matters. But the incompleteness is worth naming too. Because Flame Princess, across the series, is sometimes pushed to the margins. Sometimes her story is interrupted by someone else's plot, or given a resolution that moves faster than it should, or treated as secondary to the main business of Finn's coming-of-age narrative. This is a real limitation of how the show handled her, and the fans who felt frustrated by it are not wrong. What we have, though, is enough. It is more than enough to build a picture of someone genuinely remarkable. To trace the shape of a philosophy about identity and nature and choice and governance and art, and the specific kind of heroism that consists not in fighting monsters, but in refusing to become one. She refused. Consistently, imperfectly, stubbornly, brilliantly. She refused the evil label. She refused the lantern. She refused the old model of power. She refused to let betrayal make her someone who betrays. She refused to let damage make her someone who only damages. And in refusing all of that, she made room for something else. Something that was always waiting to exist if she could only clear enough space for it. Phoebe, the girl who illuminates, the fire that warms, the queen who chose trust in a kingdom built on fear and made the fear recede. The most powerful fire elemental in the history of the land of Ooh, who used that power to build something beautiful instead of something merely dominant. She is one of the best things Adventure Time ever did, and she did it one small choice at a time, in the exact way that all the best things get done. Without fanfare, without anyone handing her the answer. Just fire and intention, and the long patient work of becoming what you chose to be. Every fire begins as a single spark, small, uncertain, dependent on everything around it for the oxygen and the fuel it needs to grow. But given the right conditions, given just enough of what it needs, just enough space, just enough time, a single spark can warm a room, can light a path through darkness, can clear the ground for everything that grows after. She started as a spark in a lantern. She ended as the fire that lit a kingdom. That is a life, that is a philosophy, That is a girl named Phoebe who burned exactly as bright as she always needed to. Sleep well. The fire keeps watch. And if you have made it this far, thank you, truly. If this video found you somewhere comfortable or helped you drift toward rest, please do hit that like button. Leave a comment wherever in the world you are, and subscribe if you have not yet. It genuinely keeps these videos alive, and it means more than I can say. See you next time, wherever the adventure takes us. A final reflection. Fire in the dark. There is a specific quality to the light that fire produces that is worth thinking about one more time as we close this out. Because we live, most of us, in a world of electric light now. Light that is constant and controllable and produced by systems that run continuously whether or not anyone is watching. We have forgotten, most of us, what firelight actually feels like as the primary source of illumination. Firelight dances. It is never quite still. It throws shadows that move and shift and change the shape of the room around them. It is warm in color in a way that electric light rarely is. That particular amber-orange gold that makes everything look slightly more alive, slightly more present, slightly more like it is doing something rather than just existing. Firelight does not illuminate everything equally. It creates pools of brightness surrounded by gradations of shadow, a world of visible and invisible that changes as the fire changes, as the flame rises and dips and responds to the currents of air in the room. You have to pay attention around firelight. You cannot just turn it on and forget about it. You have to tend it, feed it, monitor it, respond to it. It requires your presence in a way that electric light does not, and in return, it gives you something that electric light cannot replicate. A sense of being in relationship with the light source. Of the light being alive in the basic sense that fire is alive, the sense that fire is an ongoing process that requires conditions to continue and will cease if those conditions change. This is the kind of light that Flame Princess generates. The kind that requires attention, that dances and shifts, that creates as much shadow as it dissolves, that warms you differently than anything with a switch. The kind you have to be present for, the kind that does something to you when you are near it, something more than simply allowing you to see. Ancient humans gathered around fires not just for warmth and safety, though both of those were real and practical. They gathered because fire is the center of attention, because fire demands a kind of collective presence. Everyone who gathers around it is oriented toward the same point, drawn into the same circle of light, made aware of each other in the particular way you become aware of the people who share your fire. This is why the metaphor of a hearth as a home's center is so persistent and so universal. It is not just warmth, it is the thing that makes a collection of people into a group. That orients them toward each other in the shared attention of tending to something together. Flame Princess is that kind of center. She has always been that kind of center, even in the lantern. The Fire Kingdom was oriented around her containment the way a village is oriented around its well, or its market, or its temple. The thing that defines the social arrangement of the space even through its absence. When she is gone from the room reorganizes itself toward where she was. When she is present, everyone is aware of her, responding to her, adjusting their position relative to her heat. This is partly just physics. She is a fire elemental. Rooms warm when she enters them. The air currents change. The light quality shifts toward orange and amber. Shadows reorganize themselves around her as a new center of illumination. The physical environment is literally different when she is in it, but it is also something more than physics. It is the quality of attention she generates by being the kind of person she is. Someone who is entirely present in every room she is in. Someone who does not perform engagement, who actually is engaged, fully and intensely, with whatever and whoever is in front of her. Someone whose reactions are immediate and real and visible, because she has not learned the social skill of hiding her responses, and has decided as she matured that she does not want to learn that skill. That the visible reactions are part of what she has to offer. That being genuinely, transparently affected by things is not a weakness she needs to manage, but a quality she wants to keep. People like to be near people who are genuinely present. It is rarer than you might think. Most people are partially absent in any given moment, managing multiple streams of thought and attention. calculating how they are being perceived, moderating their responses to produce the desired impression. Phoebe does none of this, not because she is simple, but because she has chosen not to. She has seen what the alternative looks like in Flame King and in Princess Bubblegum, the management of impression, the strategic deployment of personality, and she has rejected it. She wants to be in the room she is actually in, with the people she is actually with, feeling the things she is actually feeling. This makes her both difficult and magnetic. It makes her the kind of person who lights up a room, not metaphorically but in every possible sense. The physical light she generates, and the quality of aliveness she brings to any space she occupies, and the effect of having someone near you who is actually paying attention to you with their entire self. That is what the lantern was trying to extinguish. Not just her power, not just her capability for destruction. Her presence, her quality of being fully, completely, undeniably here. The lantern was trying to keep that presence contained, because full presence is contagious and it is powerful, and it is the thing that most threatens systems built on managed compliance. A fully present person cannot be managed. They see what is actually happening. They respond to what is actually happening. They say what they actually think about what is happening, and in systems that depend on everyone performing acceptance of the official story rather than responding to reality directly, that kind of full presence is exactly as dangerous as Flame King always said she was, just not for the reasons he gave. She was dangerous because she would not pretend. Because from the very beginning, from the moment she came out of the lantern and encountered the world for the first time, she responded to things as they actually were rather than as she was supposed to perceive them. She responded to kindness with warmth, to rejection with fire, to betrayal with fury, and then with chosen forgiveness, to governance with honesty, to art with truth. She never maintained the official performance, never learned to manage the impression she created. Just was what she was, fully and continuously, and let the chips fall where they did. That is the final philosophy of Flame Princess, the most fundamental one underneath all the others. Be present. Be real. Let the fire be fire fully and consciously and with everything you have. Not the managed fire, the contained fire, the fire that has been reduced to a safe and controllable level. The actual fire. The one that dances and warms and sometimes burns things and is always, always alive. She figured this out slowly, through years of being damaged and healing and trying and failing and choosing and learning. But she figured it out, and the life she built on the other side of that understanding, the kingdom and the art and the friendships and the quiet love and the specific, irreplaceable light that only she produces, is the proof that she was right. Be present. Be real. Let the fire be fire. It will warm things. It will light things. It will sometimes burn things. But it will never, ever go out. There are stories that teach you things, and there are stories that remind you of things you already knew but had forgotten under the weight of everything that accumulated on top of the knowing. Phoebe's story is the second kind. It reminds you that being powerful and being good are not opposites, that being intense and being kind are not opposites, that the burning and the warmth come from the same source and the difference between them is not nature but choice. Not what you are made of, but what you decide to do with it. It reminds you that being told you are too much by people who are afraid of your size is not evidence that you are too much. It is evidence that they are not the right container for what you are. That the search for the right form, the form that lets you be fully what you are without burning everything down, is not a compromise or a shrinking. It is the most important work you will ever do. And it reminds you, gently and insistently through Phoebe's whole arc, that it is never too late to become what you actually are. That 14 years in a lantern is not the end of the story. That the constraints placed on you by people who are afraid of your light can be shed. That you can find through the patient accumulation of chosen goodness and hard-won understanding. The version of yourself that was always waiting underneath everything that was piled on top of it. She found it. Phoebe found it. And the fire that was always hers burns on.